So, good morning in Germany and konnichiwa in Japan. Welcome to another outreach event of the German-Japanese Energy Transition Council. My name is Johanna Schilling. I'm Managing Director of ECOS, which is the organizational secretariat of the GJETC. And I'm honored to guide you through today's event. So while we're waiting everyone to come in, I'd like to share what we have on the agenda today. First, let me remind you, you already noticed, Frank, just a technical slide again. If you would like to hear the Japanese translation, please choose Japanese in the menu bar. There's a globe icon in your Zoom menu bar. If you would like to hear the English original voice, please click English. If you would like to hear the Japanese translation, please click Japanese. Yes. So let us quickly go through the agenda today. After welcome by the GJETC co-chairs, experts from the scientific secretariats of the GJETC, the Wuppertal Institute and the Institute of Energy Economics in Japan will report on the outcomes of COP27 in Egypt from their perspective. And after that, a panel discussion will follow. And we have invited some more experts and council members to share their views on the outcomes and to discuss how the cooperation between Japan and Germany can actually contribute to accelerating international climate mitigation efforts and also energy transition efforts globally. So this is what we have on the agenda today. In the end, we will also share an outlook on what is next, what we are working on at the German-Japanese Energy Transition Council. During the inputs and during the panel discussion, you can always use the chat to give your comments or to ask some questions. If we have time during the panel discussion, we might also raise some of the questions or direct them to the panelists. So you can always use the chat to pose your comments and questions, if possible, in English. So now to kick off today's outreach, I would like to ask the chairman and CEO of IEJ, and the Japanese co-chair of the GJETC, Professor Tatsuya Terasawa, for his welcoming remarks. Please, Terasawa-san.
Well, thank you very much, Joanna. Good morning in Germany and good evening in Japan. Thank you very much for joining us today for the second outreach event of this year's German-Japanese Energy Transition Council, GJETC. I would like to express my gratitude together with my German co-chair, Stephen Thomas. Since 2016, the GJETC has conducted a number of joint studies and also have issued several recommendations to the governments of the two countries. The two governments have expressed their high appreciation for the results of our studies and as well as for the policy recommendations from this GJETC. We would like to build upon the past success for this year and for the future. Today's discussion's topic is about the COP27 and German-Japan cooperation under this GJETC. Today, we will have two parts. The first part will focus on the review of the outcome of this COP27 by the experts from both Japan and Germany. For the second part, we will have a panel discussion among the experts from Germany and Japan to discuss the possibility for cooperation between Germany and Japan. I participated the COP27 meeting this year. I imagine a number of you have also visited and participated in the COP27 event this year. And I think there was a shared concern that our efforts to realize our ambition of carbon neutrality is falling behind the desired path. According to UNEP, even including the newly submitted NDC, the expected temperature rise will be 2.4 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level, which is much higher than our desire to realize the temperature rise within 1.5 degrees Celsius. To make the matters worse, especially after the crisis in Ukraine, we are experiencing the increase in the consumption of coal. So the path towards our aspiration is becoming even more challenging, and this is the reality we need to address. At the COP27, there was a major achievement, which was the establishment of a fund for loss and damage. The good news is that the establishment of this fund was agreed before the planned schedule, which was next year. And this is very rare in the COP history to agree on anything before the schedule. On the other hand, nothing in detail was decided for this fund. So in the next coming year, the participating countries would have to have a discussion on how to design and develop this fund. Additionally, in addition to loss and damage, we would also have to address the question of adaptation. The North-South issue, as we observe this year, would become more serious. We would have to address the legitimate concerns of the Global South, including the need to address loss and damage, as well as to help them address the question of adaptation. And as the emerging markets and the developing countries hold the key to realize global neutrality, we have to accelerate our efforts to support the transition of those emerging and developing countries as well. Germany and Japan, the two leaders in innovation technology, would have a special and important role and responsibility to address the issues that I have described. Today, through this event, I sincerely hope that we would have deepened our understanding about the issues, and I sincerely hope that we can identify specific areas of cooperation between Germany and Japan. And I will also hope that through today's discussion, many useful insights and ideas would be shared by the business community as well as the policy community of both countries. I look forward to a very fruitful discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Terasawa-san. So next, I'd like to ask the German co-chair, Dr. Stefan Thomas, to give his welcoming remarks. Stefan is heading the Research Division for Energy, Transport and Climate Policy at the Wuppertal Institute. So please, Stefan.
Thank you, Johanna, and thank you, Tatsuya-san. Thank you also very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. Good afternoon to Japan and good morning to Germany, and a very warm welcome also from my side. After having served for 6 years as a member of the GJETC and the coordinator of the Scientific Secretariat on the German side, it is a special honor and pleasure for me to welcome you as the new co-chair of the GJETC, together with my Japanese co-chair, Terasawa-san. Let me also take the opportunity to express our sincere thanks to Professor Peter Hennecke. Without him, this council would have never existed, and he co-chaired it for the first 6 years until now in an excellent way that enabled us to deepen our knowledge and our understanding of each other's challenges and strengths. We are looking forward to working with him in his new role as principal advisor. Terasawa-san has already outlined the current challenges for mitigating climate change. The key question is whether the current energy crisis may distract attention away from the climate crisis and create new demand for fossil fuels, and especially for coal, or whether the energy crisis may even accelerate investment in energy efficiency and renewable energies. For example, the IEA has just this Tuesday published its expectation that worldwide power generation capacities from renewable energies will double within the next 5 years and surpass coal as the most important source of power by 2025. We will now hear 2 inputs and discuss afterwards if the results of COP27, for example, on the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan, the new work program to strengthen ambition and implementation, and the work program for a just structural change, create new momentum for climate change, climate mitigation action, and what this in turn means for the energy transition and for our chances to combat the energy crisis. So I also look forward to today's deliberations.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stefan. So now it's time to hear the inputs from those who've been to Sharm el-Sheikh, a Japanese and a German view on the outcomes of COP27. First, I'd like to ask Wolfgang Obergassel to start. He is co-director of the Research Unit on Global Climate Governance within the division Energy, Transport and Climate Policy at the Wuppertal Institute. So the slides are already shown here, and yeah, Wolfgang's also there. Just a hint to the audience, we will upload today's slides and presentations on the GJETC website after this event. So please, Wolfgang, it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Johanna, and thank you also thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to speak here. Yeah, before uploading, we'll hopefully correct the typo, which everybody could probably see on the title slide here. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as usual, the COP had a full agenda. We already heard a couple of impressions from the introductory statements. So the Egyptian presidency built the Sharm el-Sheikh conference as an implementation COP with their priorities on adaptation and climate finance. Yeah, and somehow loss and damage didn't make the list here, but that was obviously also a key issue then. But since my expertise is on mitigation, and that's also the topic of the Energy Transition Council, of course, that's what I'm going to focus on in my few remarks. Next slide, please. So we already heard from the previous speakers that results on mitigation were rather limited. But I think if we consider this conference in a broader historic context, what we see is that nonetheless, the norms are constantly evolving towards more specificity. So the international community is getting a clearer and clearer sense of what combating climate change actually is supposed to mean. So if we look back at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was adopted in 1992, it had on the one hand, very ambitious objective to prevent dangerous anthropogenic climate change, but didn't really define what exactly is supposed to mean. So there was no definition of what dangerous is supposed to mean. And then nearly 20 years later, after long deliberations, there was a first more concrete definition at the Copenhagen and Cancun climate conferences, where which agreed that combating that a global temperature increase should be limited at 2 degrees centigrade. So in a sense, this conference then delivered a definition of what dangerous is supposed to mean, and that the world should stay below this limit. And then the Paris Agreement further strengthened this by having the objective to stay well below 2 degrees and to even make best effort to preferably stay below 1.5 degrees centigrade. And also for the first time, the Paris Agreement delivered a translation of what this would mean in terms of emissions. So next step of concretization by stating that to achieve this objective, a balance of sources and sinks of emissions should be achieved in the second half of the century. So what is usually translated as net zero emissions. Yeah, and then we can observe an acceleration of these steps to further concretize what the objective of climate policy is, because the Paris conference also requested the IPCC to prepare a special report on the 1.5 degree limit. And the special report, on the one hand, clearly stated that it does indeed make a difference whether we make 1.5 degrees or only 2 degrees. And also it translated this into more near-term emission trajectory by stating that especially CO2 emissions essentially need to be halved by 2030. And also that coal essentially needs to be phased out by the middle of the century. Then, yeah, there was a big discussion at the Katowice conference whether to accept these findings or welcome them. But then at the Glasgow conference, it was possible to officially adopt these findings into the UNFCCC process. So they were officially endorsed. And also the UK government, for the first time, managed to have a direct mention of fossil fuels included in a COP decision, which had so far always been blocked by producing nations. But here in Glasgow, we for the first time had a call to phase down unabated coal and to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. And now, then at Sharm el-Sheikh, the fight was, yeah, whether to broaden this call to all fossil fuels, which was unsuccessful in this case. But nonetheless, I think the fact that this was even discussed and was supported by more than 80 countries already sends a signal, even if it in the end didn't make it into the conference outcome. And I think we can expect that interested countries will continue their effort to have this objective also included as one of the outcomes of one of the next climate conferences. Next slide, please. What we can also observe is an acceleration of the so-called ambition cycle, which is at the heart of the Paris Agreement. So according to the Paris Agreement, all countries are supposed to maintain nationally determined contributions, their pledges, what they want to contribute to the fight against climate change. And the Paris Agreement, according to the Paris Agreement, these pledges are to be updated or revised every 5 years. Countries may also strengthen their NDCs at every time, so they are not limited to the 5 years, but officially they're only required to have new NDCs every 5 years. But as we already heard in the introduction, current efforts are insufficient, would lead to a global warming of 2.5 degrees rather than 1.5. Yeah, and according to the official cycle, the next NDCs that are due in 2025 are for the period post-2030. So they would not make a difference for the objective as stated by the IPCC and adopted at the Glasgow conference to halve CO2 emissions by 2030. And so in Glasgow and then repeated in Sharm el-Sheikh, we had calls on countries to strengthen their NDCs by the end of this year, as called upon by the Glasgow conference, and then again further strengthen NDCs by the end of next year is now called upon in the Sharm el-Sheikh conference. And so what we observe is that the ambition cycle from the Paris Agreement is sort of short-circuited. Instead of strengthening their NDCs every 5 years, countries are essentially now expected to strengthen their NDCs and implementation all the time. Yeah, and as long as the ambition and implementation levels are so low, this is indeed what's necessary if we want to still achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. So another thing that happened on mitigation is a new work program to enhance mitigation ambition and implementation in this critical decade, as was the language from the Glasgow Climate Pact. The decision to establish this work program was one of the key items to the claim that Glasgow had managed to keep the 1.5 limit alive. And now the question in Sharm el-Sheikh was, what exactly is this work program supposed to do? So the EU, many other OECD countries, and also some developing country groups wanted this work program to adopt a sectoral perspective in order to be able to get even more specific down to what are actually the barriers and what are the opportunities and enablers to strengthen climate action. For example, in terms of sectoral benchmarks, where do emissions need to go in each individual sector. So to not just look at the global picture of global emissions, sectoral roadmaps, policies and measures, best practices, etc. But the big emerging economy countries had the perspective that this work program was supposed to be a tool to impose new commitments on them. They have the perspective that the climate problem was created by industrialized countries, and so they should be the ones to solve it in the first case. And they didn't do their homework. They didn't reduce their emissions as much as they needed to. They also didn't provide financial support to developing countries as much as they should have. And so the work program was by them seen as an attempt to shift commitments to them. In the end, it was possible to have an agreed outcome, which wasn't always clear. It could as well have failed. And the agreement was to have a broad scope based upon the inventory sectors of the IPCC and thematic areas of the IPCC Working Group 3 contribution. And so with that, it is possible to have discussions at sectoral level. But also it's still very much open, and it will be very much open will be very much up to the co-facilitators of this work program to set the topics. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then this is my last slide. So yeah, what we can also observe from a German perspective there is that, well, we have this evolution of norms at the international level. We also see that especially Germany and the EU as a whole demanded strong mitigation outcome. They were also among the supporters of this call for a phase out of all fossil fuels. But we also observe that in actual policy, especially responding to the current energy crisis, yeah, these norms haven't really been internalized yet. We're seeing a strong expansion of infrastructure for liquefied natural gas. The German government just struck a deal with Qatar to provide liquefied natural gas, which will not help in the short term because it starts only in 2026 and will then last until a time where actually the use of gas in Germany should essentially have ceased. Yesterday, there was a new study by the New Climate Institute showing that the next expansion of liquefied natural gas terminals in Germany is completely outsized compared to what actually the need is. And Germany, yeah, also, yeah, unfortunately led a push to weaken one of the outcomes we had from the Glasgow conference to stop international finance for fossil fuels. Now the German government is needing that some limited additional investment will be necessary because of the crisis. And so in summary, still a lot to do involving more norms at the international level, but internalizing them at the national level obviously still needs a lot of work. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wolfgang, for your view on the outcome. So we will certainly pick up some of your topics again in the panel discussion. And again, the hint to the audience, if you would like to post any question also directly to our presenters, please use the chat. And yeah, maybe if there's some direct question on this presentation, Wolfgang can also directly answer in the chat. So next is a view from Takahiko Tagami, who is Senior Coordinator of Climate Change and Energy Efficiency Unit at the Institute of Energy Economics in Japan, the IEJ. So you've also been to Sharm el-Sheikh, and we're looking forward to hear your thoughts about the outcome.
Danke sehr. Good morning and konnichiwa, everyone. So my name is Takahiko Tagami. I'm from Institute of Energy Economics. And thank you very much for giving me such an opportunity to speak at GJETC. So I'd like to make a recommendation, presentation on the COP27 and beyond. So beyond means it includes some sideline event. of the parties launched some special initiatives, and another means of beyond is this covers COP28 and COP29. This is in COP27, we had a lot of homework towards COP28 and 29. Also, thank you very much. so this is a focused area or prioritized items discussion. On the left side, you can see adaptation, finance, and loss and damage. We have a lot of discussion on the global goal on adaptation and the finance, and in particular, the new collective quantified goal on climate finance and financing for loss and damage. On the right side, the mitigation work program and Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and other related mechanisms issues. So maybe left side is the issues that the developing countries to have, and the right side is developed countries most like to have the outcome. At the bottom, you can see a presidency consultation on decision. So this is called the cover decision. This is a cross-cutting decision over all the items discussed in Sharm el-Sheikh. So the bold, you can see a bold language. So financing for loss and damage and cover decision is the most prominent, largest outcome from the Sharm el-Sheikh conference. So next, please. So this is the key outcomes from key takeaway from the Sharm el-Sheikh. So the upper is on the loss and damage, and so as you know, the COP CMA decides to establish new funding arrangement for loss and damage, and also decides to establish a fund for loss and damage. This is prominent outcomes at the Sharm el-Sheikh. On the other hand, on the mitigation and the mitigation areas, the progress was a little bit limited. So the first para 7, just CMA reaffirms the Paris Agreement temperature goal. So there's almost no progress or changes from the Glasgow language. On the bottom, you can find the para 4 or 8. So maybe you can bold it further. So just this Sharm el-Sheikh conference put only just further in the language. So this is only progress at Sharm el-Sheikh. So this is almost the same language as in Glasgow. So next, please. So this is the homework we have. So we have 4 items in homework. So on loss and damage, we established a new funding arrangement and the fund. But the next COP, by next COP, we have to operationalize the funding arrangement and the funds. On adaptation, we initiated the development of a framework for the global goal on adaptation, but we have to have some framework being adopted at COP28. On finance, we decided to continue the discussion. And so by the 2024, we have to set a new collective quantified goal on climate finance. And global stocktake, we started this year, this first global stocktake, but next year we have to have a consideration of output to inform the NDC of each country. So next, please. So this is initiatives launched at the sideline of COP27. This is not a formal agenda of the COP27, but we have a lot of success or a launch or announcement from countries. The first one is announced as 9th November, Energy Transition Accelerator. US Climate Envoy Kerry announced this initiatives. This is using private capital to accelerate the development of renewable power and the retirement of fossil fuel assets in developing countries. So the goal of this partnership is to establish high integrity framework. And the second one is announced in 15th November, Just Energy Transition Partnership in Indonesia. This was announced by Indonesia and Japan and Germany on the ambitious and just power sector transition in Indonesia. The third one is launched in 16th November, Paris Agreement Article 6 Implementation Partnership. This is the goal of this partnership is to have a high integrated carbon market, but this partnership or initiatives focuses on the capacity building of the implementation of Paris Agreement Article 6 activities. So the very cross-cutting, most cross-cutting languages, phrases, high integrity and energy transition. So have some progress in this matters. Next, please. So this is the last slide I'd like to show you. So maybe you'll have some opportunities for Japan and Germany and Japan to cooperate. From that come the COP27. So first one is adaptation and loss and damage. We had a success in loss and damage, but we have to more adaptation must be more highlighted, and climate measures. So, but everyone thinks that the adaptation should be treated by the government support, but I think that the business contribution by supporting their technology and services is important to further improve the adaptation activities in developing countries. And the second is on mitigation. So maybe GJETC have international cooperation with developing countries in energy transition for scaling up and mitigation ambition and implementation. And the last one is the sectoral approaches and industry subsectors. GJETC worked for in some industry sectors such as steel and chemical sectors. So I'd like to, maybe my idea is to use this such experiences to share with developing countries to find a new potentials or a chance to go further. So that is just my presentation, and thank you very much, and thank you there. So go back to the chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tagami-san, for this analysis. So I saw there is a first question in the chat, which relates directly to your presentation. So it would be great if you could just answer it in the chat for everyone. And again, the hint to everyone, please make use of the chat to post your comments and questions. Now we're about to start the panel discussion, and I'm happy to welcome Professor Peter Hennecke, who's the founder and former co-chair and now principal advisor of the GJETC. So Peter, I'm glad that you're going to chair the following panel discussion. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Johanna. Konnichiwa to all of you. Konnichiwa to my panelists. Let me give a very brief introduction. As you know, we had extremely difficult geopolitical conditions for COP27. But nevertheless, the COP has sent out a very important message to the world. The COP reaffirmed the critical role of multilateralism based on United Nations values and principles, including the Paris Agreement and the importance of international cooperation for addressing climate change in the context of sustainable development. We see this outreach event and especially this panel against this cooperative background. We have formulated some questions for this panel, especially to address the topic of German-Japanese cooperation on the energy issue. And to kick off the meeting, I want to introduce two additional distinguished experts at this panel. We have with us Katrin Goldhammer, Managing Director of the Rainer Lemoine Institute in Berlin and member of the council. Welcome to you, Katrin. And we have Yasuo Takahashi, Executive Director of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies in Hayama, Japan, and also member of the council. So let me kick off the meeting and the panel by asking first Stefan Thomas and then Takahiko Tagami the same two questions. As has been mentioned, the NDCs are not sufficient. We are ending up at 2.4 or 2.5 degrees at the end of the century. So one question is there any progress in terms of the level of ambition? And additionally, against the backdrop of the current energy crisis, what can Japan and Germany do to strengthen the momentum of COP27 for climate action at home and globally? Stefan, will you start? And then Takahiko.
Well, in regards to the level of ambition, I think the decision to create a new fund for loss and damage is highly important and encouraging, as is progress on adaptation. But of course, here we focus on the mitigation ambition. At first sight, as we have heard, little progress can be detected in this respect. There was no change in the overall targets and also regarding phase out of fossil fuels or subsidies. But we also heard there was some progress in processes that may lead to more ambitious implementation and eventually strengthened NDCs, and that includes the work program on just structural change. And let me highlight the importance of including energy efficiency as a priority in these discussions and partnerships. Then, most importantly, probably the work program for mitigation, ambition, and implementation. There are no commitments there, but it is opening a forum for discussion on sectoral mitigation roadmaps, challenges, opportunities, for example, in energy, industry, transport and buildings, urban systems, agriculture and forestry, and the link to investment-oriented events. So this may make the mitigation ambition more concrete due to these sectoral approaches. There is also some progress in the detail on implementation of the Article 6.2 on cooperative approaches between parties and 6.4 on certified emissions reductions, but still many open questions there too, especially on Article 6.4. There's a call for reform of practices of multilateral development banks and international financial institutions, including additional funding called the Bridgetown Initiative. And we also perceive that as a strong signal from India and other countries that they're advocating the phase out of all fossil fuels, including oil and natural gas. So what can Japan and Germany do to strengthen the momentum at home and globally? Speaking of Germany, at home we should show that it is possible to achieve a just energy transition to an almost 100% renewable energy system in an industrialist country with maintaining a decent economic strength and wealth. In the EU, which is kind of at home second level, we should work for strong targets and policies, hence an ambitious and convincing EU NDC, which may support more ambitious NDCs from other countries worldwide. And globally, we should work together with industrialized and developing countries, especially on the energy transition, for scaling up mitigation, ambition, and implementation. For example, in the form of these just energy transition partnerships, and should also support a significant increase in climate finance by 2024, including Germany's and Japan's contributions to it.
Okay, Thank you, Stefan. May I hand over the floor to you, Takahiko, and your answer? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, my understanding or my is that there was almost no progress in ambition at Sharm el-Sheikh, especially in the temperature goal. But from the viewpoint from the G20 discussion held in on 1.5 versus 2 degrees Celsius, November and October, but I think this is a very sound outcomes for this COP27. So no progress in former agenda items, but I'll have some progress in other agendas. As I said, that at the sideline of COP27, several partnerships with developing countries on energy transition were launched, such as ETA or GJETC in Indonesia, and Article 6 implementation partnership, that is the Japanese partnerships. And also after the cutoff date of the UNFCCC synthesis report, 10 additional updated NDCs were submitted, of which 9 are from developing countries, including Thailand and Vietnam. That is a good phenomenon. So I move to what the Germany and Japan can do. So I like to focus on global perspective. So maybe some first point is the cooperation between Germany and Japan to enhance such partnerships, such as JETP or and so on, with developing countries to share experience, learned, identify challenges, and devise effective partnerships for scaling up ambition. And the second one is, in addition to that, some emerging economies, my understanding recognize that they have the common but differentiated responsibility and have the potential and capacity to reduce emissions. So my suggestion is some have German-Japan partnerships with some emerging economies to identify a potential and capacity to reduce their emissions. Maybe GJET has a lot of works on industry sectors such as steel and chemical industries. So we may utilize such experience to further scale up the ambition of some emerging countries. That is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Takahiko. Thank you, Stefan, for your answers. So let me continue the discussion and refer to, in my view, an encouraging outcome of the COP27, and putting this question first to Katrin and then to Yasu. I think it was a surprise that the COP27 decided on a work program on a just structural change. We have a first just energy transition partnership agreed with South Africa, and recently with Indonesia, and more are planned with India, Vietnam, and Senegal. So my question to both of you is, which opportunities exist for Germany and Japan to cooperate? Would you start, Katrin, please?
Yes, thank you. And let me start by saying that I did not attend COP. So I can give you the perspective of someone who follows the news about COP very closely. And in Germany, there is a lot of media coverage, and I think 2 points were highlighted. It was climate resilience in developing countries, but also climate finance for developing countries. And this is also where the just energy transition partnerships come in. And what I find important about them is that they're about money, right? They're about financing renewable energy and decarbonization. Problem is that there is a lot of private capital that wants to go there, but they sometimes have problems of high interest rates. They have problems of risk. And the idea that cooperating in order to mitigate these financial risks and making these investments more economical, I think that is a great step forward. And obviously it concerns both Japan and Germany very much, because we belong to the kinds of countries that have the financial power to mitigate those risks for other private investors. And one thing that I took away from this COP was how great the interest was in private capital to go into these zero carbon technologies, which I think is not only an important thing to understand, but it's also practically a call for help. Help me put this money into decarbonizing technologies. And this is where Germany and Japan, I think, can help.
Thank you very much, Katrin. There was a little bit of an interruption, but no problem. I think we can continue. And I would like to listen to your answer, Yasua. What are your perspective on that issues? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Henike, for the questions, and it's my great pleasure to join this discussion. I would like to share some concern of previous speakers that the outcome of COP27 on mitigation was rather limited. So in this context, I recognize the importance of other initiatives, in particular the Just Energy Transition Partnerships launched at COP26 with South Africa and recently signed with Indonesia at the G20 Bali Summit, which may contribute to helping partner countries pursue ambitious just energy transition. One notable approach of this partnership is to develop financial mechanisms and policy instruments that are tailored to political economic conditions of each partner country. So the financial mechanisms and policy instruments that will be developed under the GJETC with South Africa are different from those with Indonesia. But there are opportunities for mutual learning from each other in terms of how to promote the early retirement of coal-fired power plants, accelerate renewable energy investment, and ensure just transition of coal-dependent communities in different political and economic conditions. This is particularly so with a view to extending this partnership with India, Vietnam, and Senegal. As the current and next chair countries of G7, Germany and Japan can initiate a kind of process to learn lessons from the ongoing GJETC for further partnership with other countries. I would also like to touch upon the Paris Agreement Article 6 implementation partnership, which Japan launched at COP27, as mentioned by Tagami-san in his presentation. This partnership joined by 40 countries, including Germany. So, and my institute, IGES, has been heavily involved in the negotiation of Article 6 and the capacity building activities of partner countries, and also the launching process of this new initiative. And I hope we can cooperate with German colleagues to contribute to global emission reductions by developing high integrity carbon markets, supporting the implementation of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jutta. And I'm very happy to see the headquarters of IGES in back of you. I've been a member of trustees and I admire the beautiful view on the Mount Fuji from your headquarters. So good luck to you and to the Institute. Now let us step a little bit more concrete in the direction of current decarbonization strategies of Germany and Japan, which were presented at COP27. So what were the concrete steps and what will happen towards decarbonization on the national level in Germany and Japan? And what are the ideas and philosophies behind these plans? Stefan, will you start, please?
Yes, thank you, Peter. As you may know, Germany has a target of minus 65% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 1990, and greenhouse gas neutrality by 2045. There are also sectoral targets for 2030, year on year. For example, the buildings should almost halve their greenhouse gas emissions compared to 2020. And the 9 ministries are in charge. They have to lay out a plan if the annual target is missed, as was the case last year for buildings and transport. The ideas and philosophies behind these targets and the roadmaps to achieve them are energy efficiency first, while boosting green electricity and electrification along with clean hydrogen. And for example, the government now plans to invest 12 to 14 billion euros per year in buildings renovation and green heating systems each year until 2026. From 2024, any new heating system must have 65% of renewables, which basically means there will be either heat pumps or green district heat. In the transport sector, the implementation roadmap is still the weakest. We're still discussing the policies, but there is a target to double train passengers by 2030 and to have 50 million electric cars on the road by then. For industry, we are now launching carbon contracts for difference for low carbon steel, cement and others, but also support energy efficiency. And the basis for all this electrification are renewable electricity from the target is to increase that from around 50% now to 80% in 2030. And in absolute terms, this will actually be more than the current power consumption. And the plan is to increase it further to almost 100% already by 2035. In addition, there is a plan now to have 10 gigawatts of electrolyzers in 2030. Of course, there are challenges in meeting all these ambitious targets, not the least the workforce, maybe also the supply of technologies. Some legal barriers still have to be removed, and we have to track the cost effectiveness of all these technologies and adapt the financing and grants framework so that investors will actually, in fact, use them and invest in them. There is also a need to still create a favorable regulatory and market framework, especially for the flexibility resources which will be needed in this electricity system based on mostly photovoltaics and wind energy. And in some areas, we have to make the transition a more just transition, for example, in the renovation of rented buildings, for the car industry and for the gas supply industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. There was a critical remark by Wolfgang on the possible lock-in effects of the LNG terminals. Would you react a little bit on, or elaborate a little bit on this very briefly? Is it your view as well?
Yes, I share this view that it is understandable that energy security is paramount now, but we have to really take care not to create infrastructures that would lock in the use of fossil gas. So it's important to make them convertible to importing for instance, green ammonia or green hydrogen. And we also showed that if we really take the buildings renovation and the shift to heat pumps and green district heating serious, it would be possible to avoid to convert the temporal floating regasification units that are now being installed to permanent land-based LNG terminals that are currently planned for 26 and 24. These could actually be avoided through energy efficiency and green heat.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's not an issue only for Germany, Takahiko. When I put the floor to you, maybe you can respect the same question and look at and answer it from the perspective of Japan. But the floor is yours for your answer, please.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very
Professor.
much.
So yes, so Japan is doing progress in climate change policy, especially on clean energy strategy. Now we are developing clean energy strategies. This includes some transformation paths for each industry and the demand-side energy transformation and the policy measures necessary for transformation. So ideas and philosophies behind that is for Japan to be decarbonized. It is essential to transform its energy supply demand structure as well as industrial structure. So in the strategy, we have direction of green transformation. We call it GX. It is a Japanese jargon for green transformation. So we have a direction of green transformation for 70 industries. So this direction green transformation covers ammonia, hydrogen, offshore wind power, battery cells, nuclear power, carbon dioxide capture, synthetic fuels, chemicals, steel, automobiles, housing, building, and infrastructure. So it covers 17 sectors. So we are now finalizing 5 policy initiatives for achieving GX, green transformation, budget measures, regulatory and institutional measures, and the financing package. Phase development of the GX League. I did the voluntary framework for emission trading and the global strategies for the decarbonization related industries. So I'd like to touch upon the possible joint initiatives for COP28 between Germany and Japan. So while Japan and Japan face different national circumstances, but we are common in that our future decarbonization highly depends on the hydrogen and its derivatives, particularly on the imports of them. So maybe a possible joint initiatives for GJETC would be on the building a value chain of hydrogen and the development of technology in hydrogen application. So I'm very happy if my suggestion, just a suggestion, but will be included in the GJETC's future agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Takahiko. Now let's step forward to, I think, 2 very important outcomes of COP27 concerning the issue of loss and damages and global stock taking. As we know, Japan and Germany are different. We have different frame conditions, different possible options, and maybe different priorities on energy policy. But nevertheless, when it comes to this key question of loss and damages and adaptation or stock taking, Germany and Japan have to work together to develop and speed up the process in the direction of COP28. So my question goes to Katrin and then to Yasu. What is your perspective on that issue? How can we contribute as countries to speed up the process globally?
Well, I think what I realized also through the current meeting that we had as the German-Japanese Energy Transition Council is how both Germany and Japan are currently affected by an energy crisis, which is severe and which hits us from 2 sides. So one is we're very dependent on international commodity markets. So we suffer from price volatility and price increase. And we're also both highly industrialized countries, which are dependent on other markets and economies going very well. So we're very dependent on the fact that in other countries, international markets for our products are doing well. So we both have these issues on our agenda. And at the same time, we need to cooperate in order to decarbonize our own industries, but also help finance decarbonizing international industries. And I think this is where Germany and Japan have a very special position. which makes it especially important for these two countries to cooperate. I also want to raise one issue which I think is very important, and it comes back to finance. I think Germany and Japan have a dedication to work on changes in international finance. We're both two of the largest members of the World Bank, and the World Bank could be a very important player in these international projects. Yep. And I think this is where Germany and Japan have a high responsibility, because COP continuously shows us how funneling private money into the right kinds of investments will be a game changer. And I think the impact that we could have on World Bank could be very important in this respect. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Katrin. Now the floor is yours, Yasu. What is your perspective on that issue?
Okay, thank you, Professor Hennicke. Thank you for your kind words to IGES. I really hope you will join us, visit our headquarters again.
I would appreciate it.
Thank you. I really agree with you that Germany and Japan should cooperate toward the global decarbonization. It was a little bit disappointing that COP27 only agreed on the mitigation work program for urgently scaling up mitigation ambition that lacks specificity. Dialogues for information exchange will be held twice a year, but with a provision and caveat that it will not lead to new targets. So I think G7 can be one of the vehicles for accelerating concrete action toward net zero. And G7's commitment have been stronger year by year. Under German leadership last year, G7 Elmar Summit committed to specific numerical targets and enhanced measures for decarbonization in road transport, methane, aviation, and shipping. So such a sector-based commitment can be extended to other sources such as residential energy efficiency and industry, including petrochemistry, which GJETC going to address next year. And it is clear that G7 alone cannot solve the problem. So collaboration with G20 is also critical. So in this context, it is reported that India intends to use its G20 presidency to bring the voice of a global South. But I think India has clear interest in energy transition in industry and residential sectors and road transport, etc. So, for example, India chaired the leadership group for industry transition, which was launched at 2019 UN Climate Action Summit. Energy-intensive industry can be mass progress on low-carbon pathways, aiming to achieve net zero carbon emissions. Hydrogen, in which all Germany, Japan, and India, all three countries are very interested in, and can also play a critical role in decarbonizing the industrial sector, including petrochemistry. These are common areas where the three countries can find interest and can promote enhanced action under the G7 and G20 processes. GJETC can make a substantial contribution in this area, I think. I also like to point out the importance of initiatives by local governments. In Japan, more than 800 local governments, which cover almost 95% of Japan's population, have announced their commitments to net zero carbon emission by 2050. And the government is now eager to support these local governments to introduce innovative measures to enhance renewable energies or lifestyle change towards sustainable and resilient communities. And I think Germany is very famous for their environmentally advanced cities. So we can collaborate to advance these initiatives globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yasu. There are 7 minutes left for questions from the audience. I'm looking at the webinar chat, and I would like to select maybe one which has been risen by, let me have a look, Florentine Koppenburg. When this works, can you let it go? Okay. Johanna, can you help me
Yes, I can read
whether,
out that question. So
yeah,
Florentina
okay.
of Technical University of Munich
Yes,
asked
please.
about that side event which Tagami-san mentioned during COP27 on joint credit mechanism. So since Japan has long been a large donor in climate finance and has advocated trading carbon credits, how is Japan planning to engage in the construction of a strong global carbon market? That is the question here.
I think this goes to Takahiko, if possible. Can you answer it?
Yes, so thank you for the question. So I'm one of the designer of joint credit mechanism almost 12 or 13 years ago. So I like to make a strong growth in joint crediting mechanisms. But in these years, since the start of the joint crediting mechanisms, the JCM is a little bit weak or infant, very small in numbers of emission reduction unit. So we are now thinking about enhancing the joint crediting mechanisms. So as Takahashi-san said, that we started the Article 6 implementation platform. So we are now more countries. We like to cover more countries than ever. To maybe we would like to have a target 30 countries to include in engage in joint crediting mechanisms. So and we have thinking about enhancing or broaden the scope of joint crediting mechanism. So we have an energy efficiency project and renewable project, but we like to have some large, a number of sectors and joint crediting mechanism, and to make a strong, high integrated market for some Article 6, maybe a 6.2 mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Takahiko. Johanna, I think there is another question in the chat on the hard to abate sectors on steel. Can you read it? For me, it's not available.
Yes,
maybe you can put it to Stefan.
Yeah, it's
we worked on that.
Right, a question from Matsushi Kurosawa of the Institute of Applied Energy in Japan. So industrial decarbonization is important as one of the hard to abate sectors. So the question is, Kurosawa-san appreciates GJETC's efforts for the project concerning steel industry. We already prepared a study on that. So what kind of messages and inputs are expected from GJETC to 2023 G7 in Japan, especially for the industrial decarbonization?
I think this is to Stefan. Can you refer a little bit to the study of the GJETC on the steel industry?
Yes, we have been working on decarbonization of industry in the last 3 years. Actually, we started with an overview study on potential for decarbonization of hard to abate industry sectors, including potential of CCU and CCS. Last year, we prepared a study on the decarbonization of the steel industry, which looked at the two countries, what is the targets of the major industry sector, industry companies, and what could be the roadmap towards decarbonization. And it was encouraging to see that companies have very similar targets for 2030 and 2050, and also have similar concepts for how to achieve decarbonization by 2050. This year we are doing a similar analysis on the chemical industry, and especially the petrochemical industry, which will also be mentioned in the outlook at the end of this event. and we will discuss the results of the study at our next meeting in March, and after that it will be published. And these are mostly looking at the potential in domestic in both countries, and the bilateral cooperation between Japan and Germany in these areas, and making recommendations to policymakers, which we hope they can consider and pick up. Yeah, I take note that we could also discuss in the study team whether we could make some recommendations on the broader G7 or G20 scope for cooperation in these industrial areas, sectors.
Right. Maybe I can just, while Peter is not visible now, I can just raise one more question, which also relates to the working program and the cooperation between Germany and Japan. The question, what kind of cooperations between Japan and Germany on hydrogen are concretely imaginable as of now? So hydrogen is certainly a big topic these days. So who would like to answer here? Yeah, maybe our Japanese colleagues, Takahashi-san, maybe, or Katrin. Yes, please.
Well, when it comes to hydrogen, you need to be aware how the German hydrogen programs are very much focused on green hydrogen. And we acknowledge that Japan has a lot of knowledge on using several kinds of hydrogen, which could be interesting for us when it comes to hydrogen usage and integration into the energy system. The German perspective would be very interested in understanding more about production of green hydrogen, which means we're interested in electrolyzers and in hydrogen storage. And we need to look for connections around these technologies. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, maybe from Takahashi-san or Tagami-san, any comment on the hydrogen issue?
Tagami-san, please.
Well, thank you. So I touched upon the hydrogen cooperation between Germany and Japan. So maybe Japan has would like to have many options. So Catherine-san touched upon the green hydrogen. So maybe Japan has to have two options: green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. So maybe in Japan that renewable capacity is a little bit limited in domestic areas. So we have to have import green and blue hydrogen as many as possible. So maybe we are open to hydrogen in the near future. But maybe the important thing is the value chain of hydrogen. We have to have construct a building, building some value chain from the country. The green hydrogen created, or blue hydrogen is created. So we must have some cooperation between Germany and Japan on the hydrogen value chain issues. That is just my comment. Thank you.
Is it possible to hear me now? I changed the computer.
Yes.
Okay, I see. Yeah, sorry for this technical interruption. These things happen in video conferences around the globe. We are coming to a close of this panel. And before I hand over to the closing remarks of the co-chairs, let me thank very much the four panelists for their inspiring answers and thoughts. It seems to me that we have many new challenging questions which have to be answered when it comes to speeding up, scaling up, and tightening up of climate mitigation strategies in both our countries and globally. And unfortunately, COP27 postponed many answers which we need urgently. I personally see the GJETC as a role model for evidence-based policy advice to rise ambition levels of both our countries. Of course, there are many conflicting views out of there in the world. But at the end of the day, our job as scientists is to look for solutions in the common interest of mankind. As we are approaching the end of our outreach event, I would like to ask the co-chairs to answer a final question together with their closing remarks. We discussed many challenges, new challenges for Japan and Germany on the energy cooperation in the light of COP27. And my question to you is, do you see new priorities concerning our cooperation at the GJETC? Stefan, will you start first? Sorry, just starting with Tatsuya, if you like to be the first one.
So will be my closing remarks.
Yes, please.
Well, thank you very much for the fruitful discussion, starting with the review of the COP27, as well as a very informative panel discussion about the potential for cooperation. I cannot summarize everything in just 3 minutes, but I'll just to share with you some of my understanding of today's discussion. I think we all agree that in order to realize carbon neutrality and achieve our ambition, we will need to have the actions by the emerging economies and the developing countries. And Japan will be the chair of the G7 summit meeting next year. And Japan, as the only Asian member of the G7, I think we have a special responsibility to ensure the G7, the industrialized world, would ensure the energy transition for the emerging and developing worlds, especially in Asia. And what will be the specific steps for cooperation, especially between Japan and Germany? Today's discussion led to a few candidates. One is financing. There is a huge potential for energy transition in the emerging and the developing world, but the financing is not there. So this is an area in which Germany and Japan, together with the multilateral financial institutions like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank or other institutions, can be helpful, together with the participation by the private financial sector, to provide the financing. That's number one. Number two, we discussed about the possibility of the credit markets, globally speaking, using the Article 6 of the Paris Accord, which is still in the early stage, but by Germany and Japan working together, including providing capacity building, we may make this credit market be more effective as a tool to realize decarbonization for the world, including the emerging markets. The third area, I think, is that we can share our experience and technology with the developing and emerging markets, especially in terms of energy efficiency and also decarbonization of the industrial sectors. These economies, especially the emerging economies, are expanding in their energy demand, and they have very strong industrial sectors. So these two aspects, energy efficiency and the decarbonization of industrial sectors, will be very important for these countries. And I think the Germans and Japan's experience can be very helpful in this regard. At the same time, we tend to think only in the terms of mitigation, but to really win the hearts and souls of the emerging and developing countries, we would have to touch upon loss and damage as well as adaptation. And especially for adaptation, I think many technologies that Germany and Japan have can be very helpful for the adaptation efforts by the emerging and developing economies, not just by the governments, also by the industry and the business. They have a great deal of technology that can help the adaptation efforts in those areas. Having said so, in order to provide the support and assistance, Germany and Japan, we also have to improve on ourselves. We have to be better. And I think there are three areas. One is energy efficiency. There's much more room left. And I think it is very timely that this GJETC will be focusing on the energy efficiency for buildings. There's a great deal of potential remaining, and especially for how we can make the existing building stocks efficient. This is not easy, but very important. And hopefully by Germany and Japan working together under this GJETC, we can expand the scope of the technology or systems to enable energy efficiency, especially in terms of buildings, that eventually we can share those experience and system with the emerging and developing world. The second area is in the hard-to-abate sectors. And this year, we'll be focusing on the decarbonization of the chemical industry. I think if we can make progress together between Germany and Japan, eventually we can share the technology and our experience with the developing and emerging economies. So this will be helpful as well. So in order to support, we need to be better. And to be better, we can work together and learn from each other. And also having achieved in making us better, we can provide better assistance to the emerging economies and developing economies together. So there are two areas of cooperation, making us better and also cooperating in assistance. Finally, one thing which emerged today is the risk or concern surrounding the lock-in problem. It's not just Germany facing this problem by developing and constructing new LNG terminals. Many Asian countries have already invested or starting the investment to expand their LNG receiving or using infrastructure. They have been considering the transition from coal to gas as the major pillar of their energy policy. And these are already in place. Some of them are already in operation. Some of them are still in the progress. So we have to deal with the possibility of locking both in Germany, but in the many emerging developing countries. And there are maybe two things that would need to happen by making the hydrogen or ammonia reality. We can provide the path for the transition from those gas related infrastructure to be using clean hydrogen and ammonia in the future to ensure that those infrastructure will be consistent with our long-term goal of carbon neutrality. And also this would provide another channel to deal with the concerned problem of locking or stranded assets with regard to our investment in the non-Russian source of LNG and natural gas. We have to find useful ways to utilize those expanded investment in natural gas or LNG. Germany is investing in Qatar, and we are finding additional sources of LNG, non-Russian sources of energy. We have to find a long-term demand which will be consistent with our long-term goal of carbon neutrality for those expansion of LNG capacity, both by Germany and Japan. And we believe from Japan that it will be using those added natural gas to produce clean hydrogen ammonia in the future to ensure the expanded capacity investment in LNG will be consistent with our long-term goals of realizing carbon neutrality. So hopefully these will provide some basis for future cooperation between Germany and Japan, especially under this GJETC, and especially in light of our chairmanship of the G7 of next year. So we continue to look forward to having discussion with the German side, and we have high hopes for the joint projects between the two sides. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tatsuya. I couldn't agree more, especially when it comes to closing the implementation gap on energy efficiency. We must be better, and we can be better. Thank you very much for your insight, for your thoughts. Now I hand over to Stefan for his thoughts on priorities. Please, Stefan.
Thank you, Peter. I think, I also think that we are in agreement with most of the priorities that Teresa-san mentioned, especially the need to improve ourselves and also improve international finance for climate mitigation, but also adaptation and loss and damage, and also about the sectoral approaches, for instance, in industrial subsectors such as the chemical and especially the petrochemical industry. The German government here has advocated the formation of an overarching climate club, but there may be scope to start with one or more climate clubs at the sectoral level, including industrialized countries such as Japan and Germany, but also emerging and developing countries. I'm also very glad that you mentioned energy efficiency and conservation in buildings here, but also in other sectors is an important pillar to the energy transition and decarbonization. We see potential, for example, in exploring the combination of German design and technologies for building envelope efficiency with Japanese technologies for building and home energy management systems, where the heating and cooling technologies would be adapted to the respective climate and other characteristics. And this could be also an area where other countries could benefit from such technology cooperation. Globally, today's discussion also suggested to work together with developing countries and emerging economies, especially in the energy transition, for scaling up mitigation ambition and implementation, for example, in the format of just energy transition partnerships. And as you mentioned at the end of your remarks, we need to continue our debate on the extent to which these countries and also our countries can achieve a transition to a decarbonized energy system, more directly going from coal to renewable energies, where LNG may play a role and gas power plants as a backup energy, so as to, however, also avoid the need to decarbonize fossil fuels, at least for a major part. And this is also needed for the industrialized countries such as Japan and Germany. And yeah, again, pointing to the need that such mitigation partnership would benefit from a joint support by Germany and Japan for a significant increase in climate finance by 2024, including our own contributions to it. On behalf of the co-chairs, let me again thank you for your participation in today's event. I hope the inputs and discussion were useful for our own endeavors. And this event will conclude with an outlook on upcoming GJET studies and events. For this, I hand over to Johanna Schilling again.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. So we come to the end of this outreach. Some questions remained in the chat, for example, on the Article 6, the market mechanism. So we will consider to add some replies maybe in the summary of this outreach, which will be published on the GJETC website. We'll also publish the presentations and the recording of the outreach. So now I would like very quickly give a short overlook on the next milestones of the GJETC. So we had our council meeting end of November. We have this outreach event now. Two studies which have already been mentioned are being prepared right now. So one on the decarbonization of the building stock in Germany and Japan, and the other one on pathways to GHG neutrality in the petrochemical sector. And there's a topical paper being prepared, which is going to be finished by end of this year already, while the studies will be published next year around March, after the next council meeting, which will hopefully take place in Tokyo, again in presence after a lot of online and hybrid events. We'll have an in-person meeting again in Tokyo, and we are planning to combine this with a stakeholder dialogue with representatives from the industry of both countries. And then once the studies are finalized, we are planning another outreach event around May next year. So that is what's on the agenda of the council, but we got a lot of feedback from you today and a lot of ideas, I think, for next studies or also outreach topics for outreach events. So you can stop sharing the slide, Frank. I would like to ask the presenters of today, the panelists of today, to switch on the camera one last time to give a goodbye wave to everyone. So thanks to the participants to be with us today. We hope you enjoyed the event today, and we hope to see you again on next occasion, maybe on the next outreach event. So to everyone, have a nice weekend, which is very close in Japan already, and have a nice end of the year, and stay healthy. See you soon again. Goodbye.